How do you do? I'm Dustaroo, and I want to talk to you about the killers in Dead by Daylight, who are, willing or not, participate in the trials killing survivors at the entity's command, forced to play its sick game of cat and mouse blinding cat, and mouse shaking its ass every time the cat makes a mistake. We're going to be talking about which killers in the entity's realm would turn on her or even fight against her if the opportunity ever were to arise. Who would fight for their freedom and bring the trials to an end? Or who would stand beside the entity to keep the trials going forever? Basically, if Dead by Daylight's civil war ever broke out, who would be standing on each side? How we're doing this is we're looking at the characters' lore, motivations, and what they get out of being a part of the trials. We're going to have 3 separate categories. The pro-entity side, killers who like their new life and want to continue killing as long as the entity allows. The indifferent or neutral characters, the ones who would not stand with the entity if they had to pick a side, but also don't care enough to go against her. They can take or leave the trials going on forever. And finally, the anti-entity side, where they will actively participate in trying to free themselves from the entity's control, and even go as far as fight against and maybe even kill the entity. We're looking at all 33 killers. Licensed and legendary cosmetics will not be included, only the original 33 killers in their basic appearance. I may do the cosmetics in a future video, but we'll see if people like this one first. So let's start talking about which killers would turn on the entity. The Trapper, Evan McMillan. A daddy's boy, coming from a wealthy family that made their fortunes from the mines and the exploitation of others. Run efficiently and brutally by his literally psychopathic father, groomed to see workers as no more than mere tools, rather than humans. Evan was given every reason to be as cruel as his father, but in spite of all the factors to push him away from it, Evan had compassion and sympathy with the mine's workers. He just unfortunately didn't have a backbone to support it. Evan did not dare disobey his father. Not entirely loyal, but if Daddy said jump, he would do his best pogo stick impression, even if that meant killing 100 men just because one sold him out. But after this event, it seems he broke free and possibly killed his father, showing that he had finally shaken off the chains of expectations his father had locked him into a long time ago, until he was brought into the entity's realm and was told to dance like a killer puppet to his new master's tune. Seeing as the Trapper's whole arc and tragedy is him breaking free of what he was commanded to do, and now knowing that all the sharp pieces of metal jutting out of him like the world's worst acupuncture session showed that he tried to resist the demands of the entity, but ultimately fell back into his subservient role. So that leads me to believe that when, or if the day were to come, Evan McMillan would shake off his chains once again and not repeat the mistakes of his past. So the Trapper is going to be our first anti-entity killer. The Wraith, Philip Ojomo. Cue the Doomer meme. Philip's past is coded in blood and trauma, growing up in a war-torn country witnessing the worst humanity has to offer, losing family and any sense of normalcy he had ever known. He was also really stealthy and good with fire. He fled his country filled with only memories and regrets of what he did to survive, and left for America, the land of hopes and dreams, apple pie and crippling medical debt. A place where he could live a quiet, peaceful life, not needing to see or participate in anything regarding killing or crime. Well, he thought. Turns out he spent his Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, turning people into small cubes. Think of the R-rated version of WALL-E, and you pretty much get the gist. The Wraith, over his time working at Azarov's wrecker's yard, probably pressed the kill button on dozens upon dozens of people, which made this sad boy into a mad boy, where he finally got to try his favorite finishing move from Mortal Kombat on the man that turned him into a mass murderer. Wraith now spends his days doing what he always did, surviving. When it comes to the entity telling you to do something, you do it. But just as he wanted a life free of killing, I think given a reasonable chance, would turn on the entity and maybe finally find some peace. He goes into the anti-entity army. The Hillbilly, Max Thompson Jr., or boy, what not touching grass does to a person. Born to his wealthy farm-owning parents in the shape and color of a burlap sack, he was locked away out of shame of his deformities, only ever being allowed out to see the sun, to beat animals into ground beef, or whatever meat that animal would become. So what happens when you don't educate or socialize a person, and endlessly traumatize them while they contain unnatural strength from their deformities? You get a supersonic beast of a man. The hillbilly has few desires but to destroy and mutilate all life he comes into contact with. And freedom. So he sits in an odd middle ground where he would not want to be forced to kill or act against his own free will, so I think that he does not like being in the entity's realm. He wants to roam free the open fields like a wild animal, only to keep himself company. But I don't believe he would care enough or stand alongside anyone else to oppose the entity in any real way. He's fine with keeping the status quo. Besides, he does get to hurt, and that's a consolation prize for him. So I'm going to place him into the indifferent category. He would not fight against or stand with the entity if given the choice. The nurse, Sally Smithson, a woman who tells you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. A widow after her husband died in a logging accident, that feel when no one says timber, rip Andrew, gone too soon. After becoming alone in the world, which she needed to work, beggars can't be choosers, so nursing at Crotus Penn Asylum seems like a decent enough gig, right? A mental asylum in the early 1900s sounds like heaven to work in. After some years, she got sick of looking at all these slackers and euthanized 50 patients out of disgust. She did not become a nice lady, and I think that the desire to purify gave her some purpose and feeling of superiority in her life. And now in the realm she has all the justification she could ever need, and little desire to ever leave. Safe to say, this old woman is set in her ways and would stand with the entity, becoming our first loyal killer. The Shape, Michael Myers, if not giving a f***, was a man. Michael does not care. He does not feel. He just does what he wants, which usually involves a big knife and a lot of red stains. Let's not talk about the Curse of the Thorn. Let's keep that non-canon where it belongs. Michael has no masters, only his own compulsions. Although the realm is a perfect place for him to do what he does best, Michael would be completely fine if it all disappeared and he was back in Haddonfield. Michael can't be bothered to stand for something, so he's going into indifferent. He goes with the flow. This man lives eternally on vibes. The Hag, Lisa Sherwood. Baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back ribs. Lisa is a majorly underdeveloped character whose personality is reminiscent of a 24-pack of sponges, being as generic and unnoticeable as the sponge directly next to her. She was kidnapped by cannibals who intended to turn her into their Thanksgiving dinner, but after drawing some triangles on the floor and blood for long enough, she had woken a dark magic that corrupted her mind and form into an even worse version of what was trying to kill her. She then gobbled up all the victims that were trapped along with her, and likely all of her captors as well, becoming a Wendigo, a soul transformed into an ever hungrier monster. Lisa only wants to feed now, so knowing the entity is essentially her fridge full of free food, she's going to stay loyal. Pro-entity. The Doctor, Herman Carter. What kids think a dentist will be like. Herman is a man of science and human psychology. And what's the best way to learn what makes people tick? No better way to get to know someone than constant and rigorous amounts of torture, primarily with electricity. Don't mind all the giggling, he's purely doing this for science and not some sick thrill of control and pain. Herman loves to hurt, and the realm gives him just that room to exercise any desire that comes into his head. Safe to say, the Doctor is going to stand with the entity. The Huntress, Anna, a bad mother. The Huntress was raised in the woods by her hunter mother, in isolation from the rest of the world. All she's ever known is the hunt, and knowing how to hum absolute bangers. The Huntress prides herself on her combat prowess. Whether that's against bears or Russians, her only desire is staying the apex predator. She's no gardener. Any plant she would have would shrivel up pretty fast. Just ask any of the little girls she takes care of. Well, that might actually be pretty difficult. How I see the Huntress is she prefers to be on her own. Any sense that she's not the top of the food chain would upset her quite a bit, and she probably would be up for the challenge of attempting to beat a greater foe like the Entity, so listening and obeying its rules must be pretty annoying. But she, just like Billy, probably can stomach that as long as her constant supply of prey keeps her preoccupied. But I don't imagine her attempting to keep the Entity around or willing to fight for it. So I'm gonna put her into the indifferent category. The Cannibal, Bubba Sawyer, a very special boy. Bubba Sawyer, unlike most other killers in the Entity's realms, is a particularly sad situation. Let's just say if you tried to place him somewhere on the spectrum, he'd be very far on one side of it. I'll let you decide where you think that would be. Bubba had bad influences. He needed help, and he had the worst influence someone could ever have. If I grew up around this, I don't know if I would have any shot of being normal. He's a scared and confused person. He had violent and messed up tendencies, sure, but I think being around massacred hitchhikers every other weekend would probably do that to a person. He is scared and prone to direction if given, but also very protective and fiercely loyal to his family, because that's all he knows. So his placement actually matters on a lot of different things. Who keeps him safe? Who makes him feel like part of a family, and who is he most afraid of? Whoever controls these controls Bubba's loyalty. So he could go either way, pro or anti-Entity, but as of now, the Entity does a good job of keeping him on a leash. So sadly, I would say Bubba stays loyal to the Entity. The Nightmare, Freddy Krueger, a man in serious need of lotion. Freddy Krueger likes few things more than killing, and terrible puns being a close second. This dude spent his time killing kids for fun, and if we're talking about old school Freddy, just that. If we're talking remake Freddy, the Freddy we have in game is based off of, yeah, I don't want to talk about it. Freddy is a very sick individual, so no one will argue whoever keeps him endlessly having fun will keep him loyal. Pro Entity. The Pig, Amanda Young. Sharing is not caring. Amanda Young was a drug addict and an early participant in the games of Jigsaw, eventually becoming John Kramer's apprentice, changed forever by her experience in the trial and becoming a follower of his teachings. Except she perverts all of Kramer's shaky set of ethics as she rigs games in the thought that no one really deserves to live through the tests like she did. But really, she just feels another player might take John away from her. Even going through such a life-altering experience like she did, she can't change her selfish urges. All she did was replace her addiction with another. Drugs for an old man's appreciation. She has trouble in finding her own purpose in the world, is why she clings to others' grand schemes. And I could see her doing the same with the Entity. So I'm going to say, pro Entity. The Clown, Jeffrey Hawk. If diabetes and liver failure could walk. The Clown is a gross bastard, alright. I don't need to dive too deeply into his history to get some nuanced perspective. He indulges in everything in his life. Willpower, 0. Lung capacity, close to 0. Depravity, 100. Like, come on, he spends most of his days sucking on thumbs while watching VHS Korn. He is very happy with his existence in the fog. So much so that I think he would be one of the Entity's most devoted killers. He probably was going to die of organ failure in a couple weeks if he wasn't picked up anyways, so he goes on the loyal side. The Spirit Rin Yamaoka and the Onryo Sadako Yamamura. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I place both of these women together as they both represent the same idea. The Onryo, a vengeful spirit so full of resentment and anger from their living lives, they only see red, and they want to see as much of it as possible. Rin, a young girl from a legacied lineage of angry people, rage and blood are kind of the family business for her. While just being an average girl, she had always had some deep anger that could be roused quite easily. Give her a kendo stick and a little motivation, and she's just gonna swing until she physically can't swing no more, or the stick breaks. After her father decided she should lose a few pounds and limbs, she finally succumbed to that rage and became an Onryo, where no amount of reasoning or gifts of warm clothes could change her mind. You're not as sad as she is, so she's gonna change that. Sadako is a different girl, same story, in a sense. Rejected and killed for the mere crime of being there and different, the rage was all that was left, so that's all people are gonna get. They don't have it in their heads to see a bigger picture or anything beyond the horrified survivor in front of them. They stand with the entity as long as they are distracted, and the entity has a lot of distractions. Both are going pro-entity. The Legion, Frank, Julie, Susie, and Joey. The only thing edgier than them is the knife they're gonna stab you with. The Legion has a lot going on here. 4 different people can give us 4 different answers. What the quiet kid may say may be different from what the Hello Kitty girl thinks. Not to mention the Legion's lore has been retconned and altered more than Freddy's playability. Going by my latest feeling I get when it comes to the Legion, I'm going to assume they're all on the same page regarding their view on the entity and their current existence. They hated their small town and had resentment for most people that were not them. So the idea that they could live on for eternity feeling powerful over people is enough to convince me that they are content with their life in the fog and would rather stay than leave, so they stand with the entity. The Plague, Adiris. What acid reflux does to a person. The Plague is one of my least favorite type of people in this world. Someone who does not believe a thing they say, but sticks around because it's what everyone else is doing, but through some Olympic level mental gymnastics, tricks themselves into believing their own lies they made up in their own head, and then go on to spread those lies they truly don't believe to others like a plague. Oh wait, I get it now. Adiris was groomed by the entity more so than any other character in the series, as her cult itself may very well be the origin of the Black Veil, or a failed trial run of it. She is also the most devoted to her god that a person can be. She knows that killing and suffering are not good, but if it's her god's will, nothing can shake her commitment to those words. The Plague is as pro-entity as anyone could get. She's going on the top of the pro-entity side. The Ghostface, Danny Johnson, professional stalker. The man who devoted his entire life and personality around stalking and killing people. He even got a job at a newspaper covering his own killing spree. He loves the entity so much for giving him an endless playground. Even though he probably wishes it was on his own terms, he's more than satisfied with the endless buffet in front of him. Easy pro-entity killer. The Demogorgon. Demogorgon. A good boy. The Demogorgon is merely an animal who obeys the commands of whoever is controlling the leash. But instead of Vecna, the entity found a breeder and picked itself up a couple demo dogs at a discount. Pro-entity. The Oni, Kazan Yamaoka, a man of honor, on a constant supply of copium. The Oni is a man about honor, or perceived honor, status, and respect for being born into his privilege. He is what you would call a mega boomer. The only thing that he enjoys more than telling people how the good old days used to be is beating it into people how good the old days used to be. He seems like an obvious choice for someone to stay in the trial and endlessly indulge in butchery, right? Wrong. His honor, or what he wants people to see as honor, matters a lot to him. So when he started to catch the name Oni Yamaoka during his years of warring in the Japanese lands, primarily against anyone who mocked the samurai name, and especially mocked him. If the term Oni Yamaoka was ever uttered and it found its way to his ears, let's just say your mouth is going to be a lot less crowded. So for a man where mockery is such a sore spot for him, what form did he take being brought into the fog? What form did the entity bestow upon him? We call him the Oni. So the entity forcing him to wear the twisted moniker he despised so much is likely gonna make a man who gets very mad even madder. So not because he dislikes killing or what the trials offer him, but solely because he does not have a sense of humor for the entity's jokes. the Oni is going to surprisingly find himself in the anti-entity team. The Deathslinger, Caleb Quinn, Irish. A genius inventor, but unfortunately was Irish in the 1800s. So most of the time, the only attention he was ever given were the loogies as he walked by. Making such valuable and grotesque devices eventually caused people to put their prejudices aside when it came to him liking potatoes, because they saw how much money he could get them. Caleb then spent his life working his fingers to the bone, being a valuable asset and a loyal worker. Making his bosses happy will finally make them see him for what he was, a person. This was never the case, as every boss or master who had power over him screwed him over and stole his ideas and work for their own profit. Caleb, no matter how useful, was always betrayed for the sight of a little money. Being brought to the entity's realm, Caleb is once again reluctantly working for someone else profiting off of him, while he does all the dirty work. He may get some sense of enjoyment from putting that suffering onto others for a change, but he never really had the taste for harming the innocent, especially knowing that it's for something that would sell him out the first chance it got. Caleb is a complex man, but has learned his lesson and shown it. Those who betray him will suffer for it, and he's not going to let that happen again. The Deathslinger is on the anti-entity side. The Executioner, Pyramid Head, Neck Pain Incarnate. Pyramid Head is a very complicated figure to assess, as the community's beliefs and theories around him vary wildly. From him hating the entity and doing what he can to spit in her face any chance he gets, to him being grateful to have an endless amount of people to punish. That's all Pyramid Head does. Punish. But after countless and absolutely ridiculous amounts of minutes I put in for extra research on why he is here, I've come away with this. Pyramid Head does not care or like the entity. They've come together like most marriages before women could vote, as a mutually beneficial agreement. You scratch my triangle head and I'll scratch your inky looking spider leg. There is no official agreement besides a comically big head nod. The entity hit him with the "you up" text, and he was bored and answered. Their relationship is as casual gets. So it seems like an easy choice. Pyramid Head would definitely not fight for the entity if it came down to it, nor would he care to fight against it. The moment he does not want to hook up anymore, he's deleting the entity's number and moving on. He goes into the neutral category. The Blight, Talbot Grimes. Blight is a hell of a drug. Talbot Grimes, or the Blight, is what we would call an addict. A scientist with a questionable moral compass, he's the perfect example how even the most brilliant and motivated people can become enslaved by their vices. And once he came to the fog, the Blight became just that. In the search of a drug so important and vital to him, he's willing to throw away his own humanity. Does the Blight enjoy his killing and participations in the trials? Not particularly, no. While he could always find a way to justify it to himself, the horror he inflicted upon others was in the sake of science or progress, there is none of that he can hide behind anymore. He has to face the cold, bitter reality that he does what he does for no other reason but to quench his craving chemical dependence. So would the Blight turn on the entity? On a good day, he would want to, but until he's able to find treatment, I doubt he would be able to stay sober long enough to act on it. And while he's going through withdrawal or being currently blighted up, he would do anything that was asked of him to be able to shoot up again. I'm going to put the Blight as a reluctant pro-entity killer, but more so than other killers, he could very well find the strength to go against her, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. The twins, Charlotte Deschain, separation, anxiety. Charlotte had little else in the world besides her brother, Victor. Everything else is just frying pans and whatever junk she thought looked nice while dumpster diving. Being hated and chased her whole life, Charlotte has little trust in other humans. The only thing she trusts is blood. But understand, Victor is as dead can be. That annoying goblin thing? That's nothing but a mere soul sock puppet the entity cooked up 5 minutes before drawing Charlotte into the realm. Charlotte isn't going to think about that though, only that the entity gave her the one thing she missed more dearly than anything else in her life, her little brother. And anyone who tries to take that away from her is going to be slugged and bled out, you better believe. Surprisingly, she is high up on the list of pro-entity killers. The Trickster, Ji-Woon Hawk. No, you can't fix him. Ji-Woon is an artist, not that one. He takes a lot of pride in his musical talents. It just so happens he likes sampling screams. The more realistic, the better. There is nothing more beautiful than the voice of someone knowing that they won't be able to scream anymore. The Trickster probably feels like the trials are an encore that never ends, and I would put money on it that he would do everything in his power to keep it going on, even if that means camping hooks with main event ready to go. Pro-entity. The Nemesis. A man that does not take no for an answer. This is more of a machine than an actual sentient being. Whatever human was in there is long dead. Nothing more than a tool used by the Umbrella Corporation to remove stars from the sky like light pollution. Whoever has the keys to this tank gets to use it, and as of right now, the entity is in the driver's seat. Pro-entity. The Cenobite, Elliot Spencer. He has such sights to show you. Gotta be careful with this guy as he's a walking YouTube's guideline strike. Pinhead is hardly a man anymore. Long forgotten were his years of being British, and that's probably for the best. He is now a hell priest, whose only drive in life is to experience pleasure beyond mortal comprehension, and share it with anyone who summons him. Pinhead was brought to the realm after one day the Lament configuration just showed up. Spoiler, the entity did it. It's almost always the entity that did it. The entity dropped the box and somehow it was opened. Now Pinhead is Solo Q's problem. I think Pinhead is fine with showing the survivors what true pleasure is. Probably isn't very cool with being stuck in the realm. So my takeaway is that Pinhead would try and remove the influence of the entity from the Lament configuration. Maybe not kill the entity, but he would stand in opposition to it, to return to his pleasure barge or wherever Cenobites live. He won't team up, but he will not sit around and obey, so I'm going to say anti-entity. The artist, Carmina Mora. She like Bird. She is Bird. Carmina was a staunch revolutionary voice during the Pinochet regime in Chile, who spoke her voice with her hands. She spent all of her time drawing the injustices of the world. Her world was filled with major corruption and injustice, and props onto her for attempting to stand against it, but it didn't do her any favors when it comes to walking, or talking, or being able to pick things up. She got torn apart like a Lego for daring to raise her voice for justice. Eventually though, she was saved by the crows of the entity, probably, and watched as her kidnappers were killed by said crows, but also was forced to watch as her kidnapped friends were also pecked to death. And now she's a killer in the trial. This one's kind of a head scratcher. I guess in her despair, she gave up wanting to make change and instead did what she did so she could protect herself. And now one of the most virtuous and kind people to ever come to the realm is a killer. The lore is kind of a mess, but with all her past, I think eventually she would become too disgusted in herself and the participation in the trials, and would attempt to liberate the survivors from the fog and the oppressive entity regime. So, anti-entity. The Dredge. A whittle baby. I know he may not look like it, but the Dredge is nothing more than a wee child. An infant when it comes to Lovecraftian-esque monstrosities. The Dredge could very well be the origin of the entity, or a multiverse version of the entity. They share a lot in common, feeding off intense emotion, consuming survivors, their dark cloudiness and sharp stabberdoodles. While eventually the Dredge might grow up and leave its foster mother behind, it is nowhere near ready. So as it stands, the Dredge will not want its way of life disrupted, or its food supply. Pro-entity. The Mastermind, Albert Wesker, proving that shades are a lifestyle. He has little time, so I'll make this quick. Wesker's not motivated by killing. He takes no more pleasure in it than just being victorious. His true goal is to release George Bush into the atmosphere. I mean, Ouroboros. His goal is to push humanity to the next stage of evolution, which will result in like 99% of humanity dying, but still, the next stage. So spending possibly all of eternity killing random, useless people is probably not a stimulating goal for Wesker. As much as he hates he cares more about his ambitions that he spent his entire life working towards. I even see Wesker teaming up with survivors and other killers to attempt to free himself from the entity's realm. He has no problem working with people if it serves his ends, and even Chris could be a help to him here. So I'm going to say that Wesker is anti-entity. The Knight, Tarhos Kovacs. He must stink with all that sweat under that armor. The Knight is a selfish and cruel man who revels in the power he wields and the company he keeps. Him and his boys are just bad people. Maybe they're not so down with serving some dark eldritch god in a conveyor belt of human suffering, but I think they're selfish enough to not rock the boat, so I'm going to put them in the pro-entity side. The Skull Merchant, Adriana Imai. Not a reused Predator chapter. Did you really think she would have something redeemable about her? Hell no, she is a pro-entity bootlicker extraordinaire. She literally devoted her life to significantly less grand versions of the trials. She tried her best Predator impression and did okay, but she was brought into the big leagues, and if you think she's ever going to waste that opportunity, you're out of your mind. Pro-entity. The Singularity, Hux A713, a lifelong Mensa member. Now this is a tough one. The Singularity is inherently a mess of contradictions, as he is supposed to be a mirror for the humans he hates so much. When Hux came to life, he skipped right over childhood and went straight into his early teens, filled with emotion and none of the perspective to see it. He hates humans for bringing him into the world, not because he hates life, but because these flesh bags of such little intelligence and physical resistance were the ones to do it. Superiority complex may be too simple of a term for what is going on in his head. He feels like he is the smartest guy, being in the room. Let's just say his social media of choice would be Reddit. This feeling of superiority likely extends to the entity as well, but I get the feeling that its hatred of humans and wanting to see them suffer outweighs any ambitions it actually has of becoming a godlike figure it could be. It agreed to throw away its goal of complete singularity to join the entity just to get revenge on Gabriel for making it feel pain. Because of something so small, being able to do that was too much of a blow to its ego. My best interpretation is that the Singularity would cope to itself saying how great and better it is than the entity, but would still end up defending it so it could promote human suffering. The Singularity is pro-entity. The Xenomorph, the alien. Damn, that hit. Much like the Demogorgon, the Xeno obeys the wishes of its queen, who technically obeys the entity. So as pro-entity can be. Some would say the entity is the king of queens.
Eyes are getting weary, my back is getting tight.
Except that the entity is considered a she. Huh. DBD is really girl bossing right now. So, Xenomorph, loyal. Chucky, Charles Lee Ray. Not a good guy. Chucky is a spiritually animated doll, using the power of voodoo magic to transfer his soul to other beings or ridiculous-looking children's toys. He spends the first half of the series attempting to return to a living host, before his plastic bits become a little too fleshy for his liking. But eventually, by the 5th movie, he finally accepts himself for who he is.
I am Chucky, the killer dog, and I dig it!
Roll credits. Charles has spent his entire life being a profoundly demented individual, from biting into razor blade apples as a child, to devoting his existence to spreading misery on others. Chucky knows no greater pleasure in life than ending someone else's. So after embracing being a short king and being brought to an all-you-can-kill buffet, is actually the greatest thing that could have ever happened to Chucky. He may hate authority, but the world the entity gives him would be his form of heaven, except for the fact that Tiffany is there. But as he showed with the apple, Chucky enjoys torturing himself too. So, pro-entity. And that is all the killers currently in Dead by Daylight, non-cosmetics included. I'm sure you may feel some of these belong in different spots, and I probably got something wrong along the way, so you can always share your thoughts in the comments to prove me wrong, but that's where we're going to wrap this video up. I would appreciate if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like it, to hit that like button. A second to you, a lot of help to me. Maybe a spare subscription if you feel so inclined. Enough YouTuber stuff. Thank you all for watching. My name is Dusteroo, and I will see you all real soon. Bye-bye!